Well, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Christine Gregory, and I am a first-year student at Tuck. It is my pleasure to welcome all of you to the Covering New Terrain Cannabis panel. Today, we're going to be exploring trends for investing in cannabis and specifically what innovation in technology means for the future of the industry. Now, I'm sure that you've seen that as medical and recreational cannabis becomes increasingly legalized in US states and around the world, this industry is booming and there's so much potential behind it. So today we get to talk to some industry experts about what this potential really means. So please, I invite you to put your questions in the chat. We'll definitely have time at the end to get to those. And in the meantime, I'm really looking forward to introducing three of our panelists. So I will introduce you and then I'll pass it to each of you to give a little bit more further information and context as to your firm or company. So let's start with Morgan. Morgan Paxhia is the co-founder and managing director of Poseidon Asset Management. And Morgan, I will pass it to you.
Great. Well, thank you all for attending and thank you very much for having Poseidon here today. Just a quick backstory. Poseidon co-founded the firm with my sister back in 2013 with the specific focus of cannabis. Back before cannabis was considered an industry, it was more of an idea at that time. But we saw a lot of open space, a lot of opportunity, and we didn't see really a solution at that time for what we were thinking was necessary for attracting capital to space, albeit via a fund platform. And so that's what was the genesis of Poseidon, and we've been investing in cannabis and hemp. Since then, we've invested in, it's hard to even remember anymore, 60, 70 companies, numerous rounds from early stage all the way through public. We've invested in the United States, in Canada, in Mexico, in LATAM, in Europe. And amazing thing is we're 8 years into Poseidon and feel like we're just scratching the surface of all that is cannabis and hemp.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Morgan. Next, I will pass to Jeff Howard, who is the founder and managing partner of Salveo Capital, which is another VC firm similarly focused at emerging cannabis opportunities. So Jeff, I'll pass it to you from here.
Great. Thanks, Christine, for organizing this panel, and thanks to the Tuck School of Business for having the foresight to have this panel as well. I think the panel's timely. Everybody knows what's going on in the cannabis space for the most part. It is a massive, booming market. For us, Salveo Capital, we started not quite as early as Morgan, but we started in 2016. It was myself and a couple of other folks were Chicago-based. We came together in Chicago, a couple of ex-Wall Street folks, including myself, and came together similar to the thesis that Morgan had, where we saw an opportunity to, we got very excited about the opportunity for where the industry was going back then. It was early days back then, but we certainly saw what we thought was eventually going to happen, which has happened, as this industry has gone from a black market to somewhat into a gray market and to a fully legalized and regulated market. And so we thought there was a tremendous investment opportunity, because back then in 2016 and even earlier, the industry was just strapped for cash because of the regulatory uncertainty and the lack of institutional capital and a lack of just large capital in the space. And so there was a tremendous opportunity, we thought, from an investor to be an investor with favorable valuations, with a very large TAM that was transitioning into a large burgeoning market. And so we started making investments in 2016, and we're still very active making investments, mostly in the private side, but also in the public side as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jeff. From here, I will transfer it to Jonathan Vaught, who is the CEO of Front Range Biosciences. This is a portfolio company of Salveo Capital. So John, please take it away and introduce us a little bit to Front Range Biosciences.
Sure, thanks for the opportunity. Happy to be here. So Front Range Biosciences is a cannabis and hemp genetics platform company. We were founded in 2015. We raised a little over 45 million in capital. We have about 60 employees, and we span 2 states and 2 continents with operations in Colorado, California, and Barcelona in Spain. Really quick, a little bit about my background. I have an extensive background in biotech, including both science and business, PhD from the University of Colorado Boulder in chemistry. And before I started Front Range, I spent about 15 years leading cross-functional teams, developing new technologies, and also building companies primarily in human diagnostics, also in food safety. I started my career in grad school, developed the core technology platform for a company called Logic, a human diagnostics company. I've also helped build the team and the company Beacon Biotech, food safety, pathogen detection, and poultry processing, and then another company, Biosciences, back on the human diagnostics side, focused primarily on next generation assay development for big pharma. Back in 2015, I saw the intersection of cannabis and agriculture as probably one of the most exciting opportunities of my lifetime, one of the biggest market growth opportunities since the internet, and then even going back to the deprohibition of alcohol. So founded FRB to really deploy similar technology platforms from agriculture and horticulture that have been successful and dominated other crops and driven success for other companies and other crops before cannabis. And at Front Range, what we really do is we're focused on fusing proprietary next generation breeding technology, research and development, nursery operations to develop new cannabis varieties across a broad range of product categories. So for both cannabis and hemp companies, and then also provide a reliable and efficient source for the beginning of the cannabis supply chain. So the genetics, the plants and seeds that really drive the whole industry. And when we look at the cannabis market today, it's evolving quickly. Consumers are looking for new experiences, and just like any other CPG category, what we're doing in genetics and research and development are what's really going to make all of these experiences possible. So we develop unique plant varieties that produce different cannabinoids, other high-value molecules like flavonoids and terpenes, and we partner with some of the leading brands and producers throughout the cannabis and hemp markets to take these products to market.
Perfect. Thank you so much, John. Last but not least, we have Coleman Beale. Coleman, I know we've been having some technical difficulties, as is life in COVID, but can you hear us now?
I can, thank you. Can you hear me?
Wonderful. Yes, we can. So Coleman is the CEO of Bastcore, which is a portfolio company of Poseidon Asset Management. And Coleman, I will pass it to you to talk a little bit more about Bastcore.
Great, thank you. So again, excited to be here and be a part of this panel. My name's Coleman Beale. I'm the CEO of Bastcore. We're an industrial hemp processing company focused solely on the stalks of the plant. So we founded the company back in 2014. After the passage of the Farm Bill that allowed industrial hemp to be cultivated for the first time in this country in roughly 80 years. And what we realized back then, and the same is true today, is that in order to really unleash the vast potential of this plant, meaning you can research and see that there's 25,000 plus different products and use cases for the plant, there was no infrastructure built here in the United States to be able to process at least on the stalk side. And so we started the company with just the idea on the sheet of paper to build a prototype proprietary technology and machinery to be able to process the salts, whereby we separate the fibers of the stalk off of what we call the hurd or their inner wood core. And so we've iterated that technology over a period of 6+ years now. It's really been a fascinating journey to see the markets come together. I mean, 6.5 years ago, there was a lot of thought process around industrial hemp, meaning anytime you said the word hemp, CBD was what was equated to hemp, and there's so much more potential of the plant, which is the story that we're trying to tell. And so today, the interest is certainly shifting, if not accelerating. We're seeing massive disruptions in supply chains globally, across the world right now. And so there's a lot of big industries looking at new sustainable alternatives to inputs into their supply chains and materials. So that's really what Bastcore is focused on, is our technology that utilizes the stalks, processes the stalks into fibers and into hurd. We purchase materials directly from the farmers. We're not in the farming business, but we certainly have good relationships with our farmers and have an understanding of that process. So a little bit about me. I come out of a finance background in investment banking, corporate finance, mortgage-backed securities, interest rate derivatives, and really all of the roles that I've had in the past really have involved working, whether it's in large corporations, starting business units within those corporations, or smaller companies working in fast-paced environments. So really, again, just saw the vast potential and opportunity as it relates to cannabis, and really felt like, there's just a great need in this country to bring back manufacturing into the country to really, again, I say, unlock the real potential of the plant.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Coleman. Now, to get us started off in this conversation, I would like to, and also perhaps, we can turn off the microphone if we're not speaking. Thank you. But to kick us off, I think that it would be great to understand from the investing side. So I'll target this question towards Jeff and Morgan, that for those of us who know very little about the cannabis industry, if you could paint us a picture as to why Poseidon and Salveo Capital specifically decided to pursue investing in cannabis. And so, Jeff, could you kick us off with this question? Jeff, I think you're on mute.
Sorry. It happens a lot. When we looked at the space back in 2016, again, the industry was completely strapped for capital, and so therefore, what we saw was this great opportunity where this very, very large industry that was moving from the gray to the regulated market, that we also thought along the way we're going to bring in new users and demographics when the product became more mainstream, which we thought it would, as more states started to legalize and it got more normalized. And so we saw this tremendous opportunity where there was this massive industry with massive growth potential, with all of these phenomenal, smart, driven entrepreneurs that had no cash. So, and there wasn't very much other cash in the industry. Again, Poseidon, a few others were in the space. And so having a market that big and seeing the growth, the year-over-year growth, what we charted out, and being an early investor at the valuations that the industry presented to us back in 2016 that are no longer there today, was great from an investment standpoint. Also, as an advocate for the plant and for legalization and so forth, we wanted to support the industry. We not only wanted to be investors in the industry, we wanted to be participants in the industry, whether that be through board roles or just different advisory roles for our portfolio companies. So we're very, very active. And then we got very, very excited about the different investable verticals in the space, and they're ever expanding. So we've invested in ancillary non-plant touching cannabis tech companies. We've invested in ag tech companies such as FRB to make to be more efficient in yield and production. And then we've also invested in MSOs, multi-state operators, and SSOs, single state operators that are vertically integrated across the entire supply chain. So grow, manufacture, and retail. And so we just got so excited about the investment opportunity, about the different verticals, about some of these great entrepreneurs, and so that's what got us excited back in 2016.
Wonderful, thank you. I'll pass it to Morgan as well.
Well, we have a lot of sayings at Poseidon where we borrow from others far smarter than us along the way. But when we were thinking about cannabis, we just kept coming back to the Mark Twain quote: "History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes." And what we saw was a regulatory arbitrage of our generation. And you could equate this, many other parallels you can look at over time, but one that did seem to have some similarities was the end of alcohol prohibition. And just the incredible amount of job creation, taxes, innovation, investment opportunity that unlocked at the end of prohibition, we saw a very similar potential to happen with cannabis, even though we think cannabis, there's far better societal benefits than alcohol. It was just from a regulatory arbitrage perspective, we saw just incredible opportunity. And back then, we were still measuring cannabis TAM, the total addressable market, in, I don't even know if we were over $1 billion yet. And last year, the industry in just the United States, in the legal market only, generated $18 billion in revenue. I think last year's job creation that was noted by Leafly.com was 321,000 jobs created in the middle of a pandemic. So, this was just an incredible tailwind of economic creation here in the United States, job creation taxes. Illinois just last month, correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff, I think it was just last month, but generated more tax revenue from the legal sales of cannabis than the sales tax collected from alcohol. So we're already seeing this. And Illinois, just for everyone's knowledge, has only been an adult use legal state for a year. And so when you have good, effective programs, the growth rates are phenomenal. And so we still think this industry has a lot of growth. There's billions more dollars of tax of sales to be generated, and ultimately taxes. I think it's something like 30 billion in sales projected by 2025 in the legal markets of the United States alone. And so it works out to a CAGR of somewhere in the mid to upper 20s. I think we're still, when we started this, the compound annual growth rate in cannabis was in the 30s. We've slowed down to the high 20s or so, which is just phenomenal. And here in California, where I'm based, we thought this was kind of the epicenter of cannabis. It's the largest addressable market for one state, knowing this was a state by state industry and would be for quite a long time. And estimates are somewhere that we're only penetrating 20% of the legal market, where there's 80% that's still illicit. And so for us, that's just incredible amount of growth, just transitioning into the legal market. But then also there's untold amounts of additional benefits from newer consumer bases, newer wellness focused individuals that would see the potential benefits, and then the longer term could be even harder to quantify, but even more significant could be on medical applications. And all of this I'm just talking about is on the cannabis side. And we invest in both cannabis and hemp, and we think when we start talking about industrial hemp specifically, we get really interested because those markets penetration into the trillions of dollars of TAM. So it's an amazing space. It still has a lot of white space of creation, of opportunity, of entrepreneurialism, and doing so in a space where valuations are still quite attractive. I feel like I'm pounding the table on Twitter these days. If anyone wants to follow Hedgy Best Dude, I talk about GARP, growth at a reasonable price, because I see so much of this industry is still very, very attractively priced, especially when you look at other highly valued parts of the the stock markets and private markets. They don't have nearly our growth rates. They don't have nearly our gross margins, our EBITDA margins, and they're trading at many multiples higher than our industry. So for us, it's like there's a lot of return opportunity even from this point going forward. And that's just the US. I mean, we do invest globally, but we just, right here in our own backyard, there's so much to unpack from a regulatory standpoint that we are very focused here. But, that's kind of an idea of there's a lot of growth left to go here for students and looking at this industry. It's a great employment opportunity, very good compensation in the space, and a chance to be, early with a lot of companies where you could, have a lot of upside potential.
Thank you. And shifting a little bit to thinking specifically about your portfolios, what are the criteria that you use to guide your investments in the cannabis space? And specifically, what about Front Range Biosciences and Bastcore set them apart? So I'll let Jeff, would you like to start with this one?
Yep. So yeah, as an investor, obviously there's lots of things that go into pulling the trigger on an investment. One of the things that we take, it's very important to us and we take very seriously in our investment decisions is the management team and the founders. And the vision that they have, and their willingness to accept advice and guidance, and so forth. So when we look at, there's all sorts of interesting and cool, form factors and different innovations happening within the cannabis space, but it's got to be the perfect match of like the right product at the right time, with the right demographic, but most importantly, with the right founder and management team. We've made pre-revenue investments, so revenue hasn't necessarily been a criteria for us. It hasn't in the past. As we've matured in our investment strategy, et cetera, we've gone, our most recent investments have been more later stage. But nonetheless, so we're looking at where companies are producing quality product, can do it at scale, and have unique form factors to be able to deliver it to the end consumer. And so we're constantly evaluating the space to find companies that are being innovative.
Excellent. Anything to add on that, Morgan?
Sure. From a criteria perspective, I mean, this is now basing ourselves off of years of investing in cannabis, right? We're in our 8th year of deploying capital and now onto our 3rd fund that we're currently raising. And so we've used all the data we collect and look at areas that we've invested in to really narrow our focus to specific parts of the industry we want to be in. 2 primary areas that we target at this point are mostly single state operators and technology. That's because our 3rd fund is really more of a post-seed stage fund. I know that's a bit specific in the life cycle, but we see a lot of opportunity at that part of the life cycle. And in those 2 primary areas, hemp is another area that is of utmost interest to us, as I noted before. But, as Jeff said, I mean, it comes down to people. These are partnerships. We're working together for years. And you got to trust who you're with, and it's not been easy. Certainly, we've been through some tough periods in cannabis and the ebbs and flows with such a tight capital market or capital flow industry. It's not an easy place to be. So it really weeds out, no pun intended, the wheat from the chaff, so to speak. And so yeah, people are paramount, and then knowing where to be and when to be. Timing is. You got to kind of set yourself up to be lucky from a timing perspective, but there's so much regulatory arbitrage, again, as I noted before, about tailwinds versus headwinds. And you want to be investing with the tailwinds and not fighting regulatory headwinds and not being too early in a place, which we've done, or being wrong, because that's just as bad as being too early. So, you want to really be mindful and understanding of regulations when looking at these markets, but, being dedicated to the space certainly helps because we're just always talking to people and looking at things. But yeah, I think those, from a criteria perspective, that I think the 2 of us summed it up.
Wonderful. Now, in reference to one of the spaces that you mentioned is most important for investments, we have technology. And considering that this is the Ag Tech Conference, I think it's particularly important that we speak to our portfolio company representatives. So I'd love to turn it to John and Coleman to talk about what are the overarching trends that you've seen in the application of tech in cannabis, and where in the value chain do Front Range Biosciences and Bastcore fit in precisely. So John, could you kick us off with that?
Sure. So it's an interesting question. So there's when we look at it, from our perspective at Front Range, we look at the cannabis plant as, scientifically, it's all the same, whether it's regulated cannabis or hemp. It's all the same plant. It's another crop, not so different than just about any other crop that came before it. And so, when we look at it, we think about technologies that have been successful and technology platforms that have been successful in other industries for other crops, other supply chains. Whether it's things like dietary ingredients, dietary supplements, even food products, food ingredients. So that's kind of how we view it, right? And I think we're seeing those trends, start to happen in the cannabis side as well. Both cannabis and hemp, honestly. They're both different because of the regulatory regimes that they operate in, but we're starting to see things that drive or technology platforms that drive these other industries, really become important in cannabis. So things like, on the ag side for us, things like tissue culture, next generation breeding, molecular technologies, based on genomics. Some of these technologies are really critical for our part of the supply chain and our part of the value chain, which is the very beginning of the agricultural supply chain or the ingredient supply chain. But if we look out across, downstream, if we look downstream in the supply chain, you also see, you see technology platforms, obviously e-commerce, marketing, social media, all of the things that drive other CPG industries are starting, are certainly driving cannabis. When we look at hemp, and you see, hemp is much more a large-scale outdoor production crop, right? And when you think about all of the different uses for hemp, that I'm sure Coleman's going to talk a little bit about, right? It looks a lot more like other commodity crops, right? So on the ag side, you're seeing technologies that are applied to corn and soy and wheat getting applied to hemp. And even things like, paper products or fiber products or building materials. And so, I think we're seeing a lot of technology applications there too. So, at the end of the day, I think, history kind of repeats itself, right? And, the same technologies that have solved problems in other industries, other supply chains are solving the same problems in cannabis and hemp.
Thank you. And Coleman, can you also weigh in terms of how you see the application of tech in cannabis? And I think also something that might be useful for our audience is, could you explain the difference between cannabis and hemp, considering that many of us have pretty limited exposure to the industry so far?
Sure. Yeah, I'll start with the latter question, because the education of that the education there is something that we've been battling really now for 6+ years. So, I mean, at the end of the day, it's all cannabis is the cannabis plant or cannabis sativa, and so once you start there and you break down further, I mean, industrial hemp is defined effectively by the government as cannabis sativa of not more than 0.3% THC content. So that is the definition really of hemp versus marijuana, so to speak. Okay. And so, but then within industrial hemp, you've really got two markets that have evolved. You've got the CBD market, which that market is more akin to growing more like you would in the marijuana industry. And then there's the industrial hemp side, which is more akin to like big agriculture, if you're familiar with like traditional agricultural row cropping. And so the planting methods, the harvesting methods, the genetics on those two are very different. But at the heart of the matter is industrial hemp is defined as no more than 0.3% THC. Interesting fact that a lot of people don't know that I like to point out is in the original definition of marijuana in the Controlled Substance Act, the stalks of the plant and the fibers of the plant were specifically carved out of the definition of marijuana. And so the stalks of the plants and the products that are able to be produced from that plant have never been a quote unquote controlled substance and still aren't to this day. So it's a different part of the market and a different part of the industry. So that's how we look at industrial hemp and cannabis. In terms of technology, the technology is really the heart of what we do. I mean, we are, at the end of the day, a manufacturing company, but as I said in my opening remarks, we started with this idea on a sheet of paper that in the recognition there was no processing infrastructure. And so we literally built a prototype, and it's just been like in other, if you're familiar with software development applications, we've just taken an iterative approach over the years in the sense of the early days, we were just taking the hemp stalks that we could get our hands on that weren't necessarily grown for our purposes and processing, experimenting with those stalks. And then as the feedstock has gotten better, we've been able to make changes to our technology to allow our process to get better. So our processing technology is the heart of what we do. And then from an agricultural perspective, we've had to work with farmers and understand, we're developing databases in terms of seed genetics and in terms of planting methods, harvesting methods, and all of that, because we see vastly different yields or vastly different characteristics depending on how it was planted, how it was harvested. So all of these things are very important to us so we can get a uniform product at the end of the day. And technology is at the heart of really everything that we do, from a marrying our software databases into our hardware technology, ultimately to produce the best product to the end customer.
Wonderful. I would be very interested in learning more in detail about the technology that Front Range Biosciences and Bastcore specialize in. So would you be able to describe in a little bit more detail exactly what you're working on, and how do you see this technology shifting the needle for the future of the cannabis industry? So John, could you start us off?
Yeah, definitely. Well, and it's kind of an extension of the last question. I think, when we look at, and per Coleman's point about the difference in the genetics, right? That's really what we focus on. So Front Range, we're very much focused at the very beginning of the agricultural supply chain, right? The plants and the seeds that produce these ingredients, that produce these products, whether they're going into regulated cannabis, consumer packaged goods, whether they're going into even the CBD space, or even potentially fiber and protein and more industrial hemp applications. And so when you look at cannabis breeding, and whether it was for hemp or cannabis or anything over the, primarily for cannabis for the illicit market over the last 50 years, they didn't have access to any of these tools, right? They didn't have access to modern agricultural technology or even horticultural technology. They didn't have access to any of these things. So most of the plant breeding was, oh, hey, let's cross these two things and see what happens. And, oh, wow, that one looks really cool. Let's run with that. And then when you look at the controlled environment that they had to grow in indoors, some clandestine space. They're worried about the DEA knocking down their door more than they were about their yield or their plant performance, right? So what that led to was the kind of cannabis genetics gene pool that we have today, which is fairly limited. We've wiped out a lot of the diversity over the last 50, 60 years because of the breeding practices I just described. And so what we've been focused on at Front Range since the very beginning was how to reverse some of that, reintroduce some of the diversity, how to really unlock the incredible potential for this plant, right? So when we look at this plant, it produces well over 500 small molecules. So for an organic chemist, it's a bit of a gold mine, and you've got 130 something cannabinoids. You've got, probably 60, 70 terpenes at least, flavonoids, all these amazing compounds. But without the proper breeding tools, without the technology applications that even just been developed over the last 20 years in other crops, things like next generation sequencing and molecular-based breeding and some of the advanced analytical chemistry techniques that we have, without all of that, then, it would take decades to get, to develop some of these new genetics. And so what we've really been focused on is how to take some of these tools that have been developed at places like Syngenta or even Driscoll's or Corteva, and take some of these tools and then start to apply them to cannabis, right, and develop them. And so, we've been really successful so far, right? And it's taken some time, right? And these things, often take a little longer than you'd like. But, at the end of the day, we've been able to unlock some pretty exciting new traits, right? So just an example really quickly is a new cannabinoid called THCV. And this is a cannabinoid it's been identified, it's been known for a while, but there was very limited examples of it in the genetics that were out on the market. They were poor yielding plants. You didn't get very high yields of THCV, and so nobody really grew it. There's no way to really introduce it in the supply chain. Well, we've been able to develop plants that actually produce high amounts of THCV. So the economics for extraction and production are much more feasible, right? And there's opportunity to introduce them in the supply chain in an effective way. And so the exciting thing about this cannabinoid is that it's got really unique effects, right? So it causes appetite suppression. It's got stimulant activity. So it's a very different experience for users. And anecdotally, the folks that try THCV will tell you, like, oh yeah, I feel that, right? Like it's a noticeable effect. It's like it's not, they're not questioning, oh, do I feel that or not? Or is there anything happening? It's something that's noticeable. And I think that's just the first example of, the types of new products and new experiences that we can develop by using these tools, right? And, it's a combination of genetic markers, analytical chemistry techniques, some trial and error, some breeding, growing the plants out, getting them in customers' hands, getting the feedback. It's all of those pieces together that allowed us to develop a new product like that. So hopefully that gives you, some type of example. And I think, we pull back out now and look at the big picture and say, okay, during that breeding project where we were developing those, we're also looking at other traits like, flowering time, or, there are plants that may have traits that Coleman might care more about, right, for his business. And so, for us, as we build this big database and we develop these technology platforms, we have the opportunity to, not only create a new THCV product, but maybe even solve some problems for Coleman, right? And and the industrial hemp supply chain, right? So the technology really opens the door for us to have a pretty broad and deep, reach across the different hemp and cannabis verticals.
Perfect. Yep, that's fascinating to learn about the application of tools in greater agriculture industry, specifically to cannabis. Coleman, can I pass it to you to quickly summarize more or less what does Bastcore do and the technology behind it?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. So one of the things that we hear every day that I believe is going to be even more of a growing trend revolves around traceability. And so the brands now, the corporations that are out there, the people making products, they're all wanting more visibility into the supply chains and into the products that are being sold ultimately to the end consumer. And so I mentioned traceability because our technology really, if we think about Bastcore, starting from the seed to the genetics, all the way through the planting, the growing, the harvesting, the baling as it comes to us. This is all information that we're tracking with databases that we built in-house, so that ultimately as we process the raw materials through our technology or our systems, we can show it very, very clearly to our partners and our customers the story around in alleviating any concerns around how the material was grown, processed, and handled. So that's a really big deal for us at Bastcore, specifically as it relates to our technology. Again, we utilize the stalks of the plant. So the thing that we've gotten really, really good at with our technology is be able to properly separate what we call the bast fibers or the outer fibers off of the inner heart or core of the stalks. And that's super important and sometimes underestimated in the fact that if you're looking at the 25,000 different use cases and products that could be made from industrial hemp, you have to have very, very clean material streams, separate material streams, in order to be able to create all of these products. And so that is the I guess the basis of our technology is being able to properly separate those materials, get good clean materials, and then process downstream to allow different verticals and different aspects of the economy to be able to use our materials. So from a technology perspective, that's kind of the core of what we do.
Perfect. Thank you for that explanation. Now we're running a little short on time, so one last question that comes from the audience. For MBA students in the room who have never worked in cannabis before but are interested in the area, what would be your recommendations for them to enter into the industry? So Morgan, can I direct this question at you?
Sure. It's amazing now there are actual college courses that are starting to happen. So there's at least some level of education. There's now a lot of cannabis clubs on campuses that we're seeing. We've been to many universities now doing talks about cannabis, and it's at their campus clubs, MBA programs, such as Tuck, which is great. Before COVID, my first response would always be events. There's always industry level events. There's certainly some bigger ones, usually in the fall. The Marijuana Business Daily, their big trade show is, I think when it stopped, there was 40,000 people or something before COVID. And there was a lot of key people there. Vanks.com is another source to look at. That's kind of like a staffing place in the industry, and they've done a lot. Trying to think what else. I mean, I know the cannabis and hemp are becoming more and more normalized. So you're finding, kind of more traditional avenues for job placement. The great thing is for folks today looking at the space, no more resume risk. We had a hard time getting great talent years ago because people were afraid of damaging their reputation by having a cannabis company on there or something, but that's gone now. I think hopefully it's becoming a point of pride. So yeah, I'm trying to think if there's others, but those are the sources that come to mind. Plenty of online activity too. There's plenty of sites, but mjbiz.com is a great one. Hemp industry, so I think it's hempbizdaily.com too. Same company, but very active in reporting on companies, and everyone has sites now. Websites where they do job postings, and it's just networking. Old-fashioned networking.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Well, unfortunately, it looks like we're out of time for today. So thank you all so much for joining us for our panel uncovering cannabis as new terrain. Please stay tuned. We'll be checking out a keynote on the next generation of renewable energy coming up. And feel free to get in contact with us if you'd like to speak further with any of our wonderful panelists. So thank you so much.